What if I told you the ancient Egyptians grew crops that refused to die? While modern gardens depend on annual seeds, fertilizers, and constant replanting, the people who built the pyramids relied on something far more powerful: plants that regenerated themselves forever. Crops that fed entire civilizations through drought, famine, and empire collapse, without ever needing to be planted twice. These weren't just foods, they were survival engines. Eternal crops that laughed at scorching desert heat, resurrected after floods, and produced every year for generations. And here's the unbelievable part: most of them still exist today, and you can grow them in your own backyard. By the end of this video, you'll discover the 10 immortal Egyptian crops that outlived kings, dynasties, and entire civilizations, and how they can feed you for life. The ancient Egyptians didn't survive for thousands of years by luck. They survived because they chose the right plants. They lived in a land where food depended on a single river. Too much flood meant destruction. Too little meant famine. So instead of gambling with fragile crops, they selected plants that could survive heat, drought, poor soil, neglect, and time itself. Today, many of those same crops still exist, and you can still grow them. So let's skip the myths and go straight to the plants that made ancient Egypt possible. The first immortal crop grown by the ancient Egyptians is one that still confuses modern gardeners: the Egyptian walking onion. Unlike most onions, this plant does not depend on seeds. Instead, it produces small bulbs at the top of tall stalks. As those bulbs grow heavier, the stalk naturally bends and places them directly onto the soil. Once they touch the ground, they root almost immediately and grow into new plants. Season after season, the onion slowly spreads across the land, appearing to walk on its own. For the Egyptians, this behavior made the walking onion incredibly valuable. It required almost no maintenance, no precise planting schedule, and no replanting after harvest. Once introduced to a field, it sustained itself. It survived scorching heat, long dry periods, poor soil, and even flooding. When the Nile washed away fragile crops, the walking onion remained underground, returning as soon as conditions stabilized. The main advantage of this crop was reliability. It provided a steady supply of edible greens and bulbs without demanding labor, tools, or constant attention. It also resisted many pests and diseases that destroyed other vegetables. In a civilization where food security depended on predictability, this onion offered exactly that. However, it wasn't perfect. The bulbs are smaller than modern onion varieties, and the flavor is stronger and sharper. Left unmanaged, the plant can spread aggressively and overtake garden beds. For Egyptians, this wasn't a problem. Abundance was preferable to scarcity. Today, the Egyptian walking onion grows exceptionally well in temperate and cold climates. It thrives across most of the United States, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe. It tolerates frost, harsh winters, and dry summers, making it ideal for low-maintenance gardens, backyard plots, and raised beds. Plant it once, and it can feed you for years. That self-replicating resilience is exactly why the ancient Egyptians trusted it, and why it still earns its place among the world's truly immortal crops. The second immortal crop trusted by the ancient Egyptians was garlic, a plant valued not just for flavor, but for strength, durability, and survival. Garlic grows in a way that naturally favors continuity. Each clove planted in the soil develops into a full bulb, which then separates into multiple new cloves. Even after harvest, cloves left behind often sprout again the following season. This simple biological cycle made garlic extremely reliable in a time when food failure could mean disaster. For the Egyptians, garlic was essential. It appeared in daily meals, medical remedies, religious offerings, and worker rations. Laborers, soldiers, and builders relied on it because it stored well, resisted spoilage, and provided steady energy. Ancient texts describe garlic as a strengthening food, believed to improve endurance and protect against illness, a critical advantage in a harsh environment. One of garlic's greatest strengths was its resilience. It tolerated poor soil, heat, and irregular water supply. It resisted many pests naturally, reducing crop loss without intervention. Even during difficult seasons, garlic continued to grow where more delicate plants failed. However, garlic did have limitations. Unlike truly perennial crops, it does not regenerate endlessly on its own. It must be replanted each growing cycle, which requires some planning and labor. Its strong flavor also made it less versatile in certain dishes, especially compared to milder vegetables. Despite that, its advantages far outweighed its drawbacks. Garlic offered predictability, storage longevity, and nutritional value in a compact form. It helped stabilize diets when grain harvests were uncertain and fresh food was scarce. Today, garlic remains one of the easiest ancient crops to grow. It thrives in climates with cool winters and warm summers, growing successfully across most of the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe. Planted in fall or early spring, it requires minimal care and rewards gardeners with dependable harvests. That balance of simplicity and strength explains why garlic endured for thousands of years, and why it continues to earn its place among history's most reliable crops. The third immortal crop grown by the ancient Egyptians was the Egyptian leek, a plant chosen not for speed or size, but for reliability. Unlike modern leeks, which are usually grown as annuals, ancient Egyptian leeks regenerated from underground offsets. Once established, the plant didn't need to be replanted every year. After harvesting, new shoots emerged from the same root system, returning season after season with very little human effort. For the Egyptians, this made leeks extremely valuable. They provided fresh greens even when grain harvests failed or when floods damaged other vegetables. Leeks tolerated heat, poor soil, and irregular watering, making them ideal for the unpredictable conditions along the Nile. They were easy to grow, easy to harvest, and dependable in years when more demanding crops struggled. Leeks became a staple in everyday Egyptian cooking. They were added to stews, breads, and broths, and they also appeared in medicinal preparations and religious offerings. Their importance was so deeply rooted in daily life that ancient records even mention disputes among workers over shortages of onions and leeks, a clear sign of how essential these crops were. The main advantage of Egyptian leeks was consistency. They returned every year without requiring careful planning or precise timing. They were also cold-tolerant and resistant to many pests. The main limitation was growth speed. Compared to modern varieties, Egyptian leeks grew more slowly and produced thinner stalks, offering lower yields in exchange for long-term reliability. Today, Egyptian leeks still thrive in temperate climates. They grow well across the United Kingdom, Northern Europe, and large parts of the northern United States. They perform especially well in backyard gardens, raised beds, and low-maintenance plots where reliability matters more than maximum output. That balance, modest yield paired with long-term survival, is exactly why the ancient Egyptians trusted leeks. They weren't flashy crops. They were dependable ones, and in a civilization built on stability, that made all the difference. The fourth immortal crop that sustained ancient Egypt was the date palm, a tree that represented long-term survival more than any other plant along the Nile. Date palms were not grown for quick results. They were planted with the future in mind. Once mature, a single palm could produce fruit for decades, often for more than a century. Its deep root system allowed it to access underground water far below the desert surface, making it exceptionally resistant to drought and extreme heat. For the Egyptians, this made the date palm a cornerstone of food security. Dates were rich in calories, sugars, and minerals, providing concentrated energy for workers, soldiers, and travelers. They could be eaten fresh, dried for long-term storage, or processed into pastes and cakes that lasted for months. In times of scarcity, dates often became the difference between hunger and survival. The value of the palm went far beyond fruit. Its leaves were used to weave baskets, mats, and ropes. Its trunk provided wood for construction and tools. The shade created by palm groves allowed other crops to grow beneath them, reducing heat stress and water loss. In many ways, the date palm shaped entire agricultural systems. Its main limitation was time. Date palms require several years before producing fruit and can only thrive in warm, dry climates. They are not suitable for cold regions or short-growing seasons. Today, date palms grow best in arid and semi-arid regions such as the southern United States, North Africa, and the Middle East. In the right climate, planting a date palm is an investment not just for one season, but for generations. That long-term reliability is exactly why the ancient Egyptians valued the date palm. It didn't just feed people, it anchored communities to the land itself. The fifth immortal crop relied upon by the ancient Egyptians was the fig tree, one of the most resilient fruit plants ever domesticated. Fig trees were valued because they thrived where other fruit trees failed. They tolerated poor, rocky soil, intense heat, irregular rainfall, and long periods of neglect. Once planted, a fig tree could continue producing fruit for decades with minimal care, making it ideal for a civilization that could not afford agricultural uncertainty. For Egyptians, figs were both food and insurance. Fresh figs provided quick energy, while dried figs stored for months without spoiling. They were carried by travelers, fed to workers, and offered in religious rituals. Because figs could be harvested repeatedly throughout the season, they helped smooth out food shortages caused by failed grain harvests. One of the fig tree's most remarkable traits was its ability to regenerate. Even when cut down or damaged, new shoots emerged from the roots. Abandoned trees often returned stronger than before. This resilience made figs symbols of renewal and endurance in a harsh landscape. The primary advantage of the fig tree was reliability. It produced consistent yields with little intervention and adapted easily to difficult environments. Its main limitation was cold sensitivity. Severe frost could damage or kill the tree, restricting where it could be grown successfully. Today, fig trees thrive in warm and temperate climates, including much of the southern United States, coastal regions, and Mediterranean-like environments. Hardy varieties can survive cooler areas with protection. In backyard gardens, fig trees remain one of the lowest maintenance fruit crops available. That combination of toughness, productivity, and longevity explains why the ancient Egyptians trusted the fig tree. It didn't demand perfection, it rewarded persistence. If you're enjoying this journey through the crops that kept ancient Egypt alive, plants that survived floods, droughts, neglect, and thousands of years of history, make sure you're subscribed to the channel. This kind of knowledge isn't trend-based, it's survival-tested. And there are many more forgotten systems like this that modern agriculture has left behind. Subscribing helps this channel keep uncovering them, calmly, clearly, and without noise. Now let's continue. Because the next crop wasn't just food, it was the material that allowed an entire civilization to record its own existence. The sixth immortal crop that sustained ancient Egypt was papyrus, a plant that thrived where most food crops could not, directly in water. Papyrus grew along riverbanks, marshes, irrigation canals, and shallow pools created by the Nile's floods. While other plants drowned in these conditions, papyrus flourished. Once established, it regenerated with remarkable speed. Cut it down, and new shoots appeared within weeks. Floods didn't destroy it, they fueled its growth. For the Egyptians, papyrus was far more than a writing material. The tender inner portions of the stalk were eaten as food. The fibers were used to make rope, mats, baskets, sandals, sails, and boats. Entire fishing communities depended on papyrus skiffs to move through shallow waters where larger vessels could not go. In practical terms, papyrus supported both nutrition and daily infrastructure. Its greatest advantage was renewability. Papyrus spread through thick underground rhizomes that continuously produced new stalks. Heavy harvesting didn't weaken it. In fact, regular cutting often encouraged denser regrowth. This made papyrus one of the most reliable renewable resources in Egypt. The plant's primary limitation was water dependency. Papyrus cannot survive in dry soil and requires constant moisture to thrive. This restricted its cultivation to wet environments, but along the Nile, those conditions were abundant and predictable. Today, papyrus is still easy to grow wherever water is available. It thrives in ponds, wetlands, water gardens, and even large containers kept consistently wet. It performs best in warm climates, but can be grown seasonally in cooler regions. That ability to regenerate endlessly from water is why papyrus earned its place among Egypt's immortal crops. It didn't just survive the Nile, it partnered with it, turning floodwater into one of the most productive resources of the ancient world. The seventh immortal crop cultivated by the ancient Egyptians was the sacred lotus, a plant chosen as much for survival as for meaning. The lotus grew in muddy, shallow water where most crops could not survive. Its roots spread horizontally beneath the surface, forming thick rhizomes that stored energy and nutrients. Even when water levels dropped and the mud dried, the plant did not die. It simply went dormant. When the floods returned, the lotus rose again, fully intact. For Egyptians, this made the lotus both a dependable food source and a symbol of renewal. The rhizomes were harvested and eaten, the seeds were ground or roasted, and the plant provided nourishment during seasons when land crops failed. In flood-prone regions, lotus fields functioned as natural food reserves that regenerated on their own. One of the lotus's greatest advantages was biological resilience. Its seeds are among the most durable on Earth, capable of remaining viable for centuries. Combined with its perennial growth cycle, this allowed lotus populations to persist across generations without replanting. Few plants offered that level of continuity. However, the lotus had clear limitations. It required standing water or permanently wet soil and could not survive in dry environments. Space was also a factor, as lotus spreads aggressively in suitable conditions. For Egyptians living along the Nile's wetlands, these limitations were irrelevant. Water was abundant, predictable, and seasonal. Today, lotus can still be grown easily in ponds, tubs, and large containers filled with water. It thrives in warm climates and can be cultivated seasonally in cooler regions. Once established, it requires little care and reliably returns year after year. That combination of dormancy, regeneration, and nutritional value explains why the sacred lotus earned its place among Egypt's immortal crops. It didn't resist death, it simply waited it out. The eighth immortal crop that formed the backbone of ancient Egyptian civilization was emmer wheat, one of the oldest cultivated grains in human history. Unlike modern wheat, emmer was not bred for speed or softness. It was bred for survival. Each grain was protected by a thick outer husk that shielded it from pests, disease, and harsh weather. Even when floods buried seeds deep beneath layers of silt, emmer could sprout months later. When drought scorched the fields, its deep root system allowed it to access moisture that other grains could not reach. For the Egyptians, this resilience made emmer indispensable. It was the primary grain used for bread, porridge, and beer, staples consumed daily by farmers, workers, soldiers, and priests. Emmer did not always produce massive yields, but it produced consistently. In an environment where predictability mattered more than abundance, that consistency was critical. The main advantage of emmer wheat was durability. It tolerated poor soil, irregular flooding, and extreme heat better than most cereals. It also stored well, remaining edible for long periods when properly dried. These traits allowed Egypt to build grain reserves capable of sustaining large populations through difficult years. Emmer's primary limitation was processing. The tough husk that protected the grain also made it harder to thresh and mill. Compared to modern wheat, it required more labor to prepare and produced denser bread. For ancient societies, this trade-off was acceptable. Effort was plentiful, food security was not. Today, emmer wheat is still grown in temperate and semi-arid climates. It performs well in regions of the United States, Europe, and the Mediterranean, especially where soil quality is poor or water availability is limited. For modern growers interested in resilient, low-input crops, emmer remains one of the strongest ancient options available. That ability to survive chaos without collapsing is exactly why emmer wheat fed ancient Egypt, and why it continues to earn its reputation as an immortal grain. The ninth immortal crop relied upon by the ancient Egyptians was ancient barley, a grain chosen not for prestige, but for survival. Barley thrived where other cereals failed. It tolerated salty soil, drought, poor fertility, and unstable floodplains. When the Nile's floods arrived too early or too late, barley still produced a harvest. This made it Egypt's emergency grain, the crop people turned to when conditions were unpredictable and time was limited. For Egyptians, barley was incredibly versatile. It was used to make bread, porridge, and fermented drinks, and it also fed animals that supported agriculture and transport. Barley grew quickly, matured faster than wheat, and required less water. These traits made it especially valuable during periods of political unrest, labor shortages, or environmental stress. The greatest advantage of barley was forgiveness. It did not demand perfect timing, rich soil, or careful management. Farmers could plant it late, neglect it, or grow it in marginal land and still expect usable yields. This reliability allowed communities to maintain food production even when resources were stretched thin. Barley did have limitations. Its bread was denser and less refined than wheat bread, making it less desirable for elites and ceremonial use. Nutritionally, however, it remained highly valuable, especially when paired with legumes and vegetables. For most of the population, practicality mattered far more than refinement. Today, ancient barley varieties continue to grow successfully across a wide range of environments. They perform well in cool climates, dry regions, and poor soils throughout the United States, the United Kingdom, and Europe. Barley remains one of the easiest ancient grains to cultivate, especially for growers seeking resilience over maximum yield. That combination of speed, adaptability, and reliability explains why barley played such a critical role in ancient Egypt. When everything else failed, barley endured, and it still does. The 10th immortal crop that sustained ancient Egypt was the lentil, a small plant with an outsized impact on survival. In a world where meat was scarce and expensive, Lentils provided one of the most reliable sources of protein available. They grew well in dry conditions, tolerated heat, and required far less water than most food crops. Even in exhausted soils where other plants struggled, lentils continued to produce edible harvests. For the Egyptians, lentils were practical food. They cooked quickly, stored for long periods, and fit easily into soups, stews, flatbreads, and daily rations. Because they were lightweight and durable, lentils were ideal for workers, soldiers, and travelers who needed nourishment without spoilage. In years of grain shortages, lentils helped stabilize diets and prevent famine. One of the lentils' greatest advantages was its relationship with the soil. Lentils naturally fix nitrogen, improving soil fertility for future crops. Fields planted with lentils often became more productive over time, reducing the need for constant land rotation. Even better, lentils frequently reseeded themselves, sprouting again the following season with little or no human intervention. The main limitation of lentils was yield. They do not produce massive harvests in a single season. Instead, they offer consistency, modest but dependable output year after year. For the Egyptians, that reliability mattered more than volume. Today, lentils remain one of the easiest ancient crops to grow. They thrive in dry, temperate climates across the United States, the United Kingdom, and much of Europe. They require minimal care, enrich the soil, and provide high nutritional value with very low input. That efficiency explains why lentils earned their place among Egypt's immortal crops. They didn't dominate fields. They quietly sustained civilizations. For thousands of years, the ancient Egyptians survived, not by controlling nature, but by choosing crops that endured it. Plants that returned after floods, resisted drought, and fed generations without asking much in return. Those crops are still here, still growing, still resilient. And they remind us of a simple truth. The strongest food systems aren't built for speed or profit. They're built to last. Plant what survives and let time work in your favor.